You know that feeling when you walk into your own house and something's just off? Like the air is different? The light hits wrong? The silence has weight? That's what Kong Jae-min felt when his matte black Genesis rolled through the mansion gates 4 hours before he was supposed to be home. The overseas negotiation had collapsed. Just ended. A deal that should have dragged until sunrise wrapped up in 20 minutes, leaving him with this strange pressure behind his eyes and one thought he couldn't shake. Go home. Now. So he did. And the house was glowing. Not just lit, glowing. Every window bright like someone was hosting a party, like the place was alive and breathing when it should have been quiet. His wife had said she'd be in the study with her lawyers. Private charity meeting. Paperwork and signatures. Nothing exciting. Certainly nothing that required every light in the mansion to be blazing at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday. Jaemin killed the engine and sat there for a moment, watching mist curl around the iron gates. 36 years old. 3 continents worth of enemies. 2 decades of surviving by reading rooms before he entered them. And right now, every instinct he had was screaming. He stepped out. His Italian shoes made no sound on the stone pathway. The air smelled wrong, perfume mixed with something chemical, antiseptic, sharp. Not the comfortable smell of home. The smell of preparation. He moved toward the entrance, his hand sliding beneath his jacket where the gun rested against his ribs, and then a hand caught his wrist. Firm. Certain. Coming from the shadows near the servants' entrance. Don't speak. Amber Robinson stepped into the dim light in her black and white uniform, eyes locked on his. No fear in her face. Just warning. Just knowledge. She pulled him backward, away from the door, one finger pressed lightly against his sleeve instead of his lips. And here's the thing about Kong Jae-min. This man, this mafia boss who'd survived assassination attempts from 3 different syndicates, who'd built an empire on never showing weakness, who made grown men flinch when he entered a room, did something that shocked even him. He let a housemaid redirect him into the darkness. He obeyed. Because sometimes survival isn't about being the strongest person in the room. It's about recognizing when someone else sees the trap you're about to walk into. And Amber Robinson? She saw everything. What he was about to discover wouldn't just betray him. It would flip everything he thought he knew about power upside down. And the most dangerous person in his mansion tonight wasn't the one with a gun. It was the woman everyone had trained themselves not to see. Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to the Nia Love Stories. Quick question. Have you subscribed yet? No? Go ahead, hit that button, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Now listen closely. Tonight's story isn't about revenge or guns blazing. This is about a woman the world trained you not to see becoming the most powerful person in the room. By the end, you'll never underestimate the quiet ones again. So get comfortable, because Amber Robinson is about to change everything. Let's go back to that garden, to the shadows, to the moment it all shifted. Amber's hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline, as she guided Jaemin deeper into the garden where the mist was thicker, where the hedges blocked the light from the house. Each step was measured, calculated. She could feel the tension radiating from his body, barely contained power vibrating just beneath his skin. Talk, Jaemin commanded. His voice was low, lethal. Even in a whisper, it carried the weight of a man who'd never been told no. And this better be worth touching me without permission. Amber swallowed. She'd rehearsed this moment for 3 days straight, lying awake in her small room above the garage, running through every possible way this conversation could go wrong. Every way she could end up deported, disappeared, or worse. Now that it was here, the words felt too big for her throat. But she looked up at him anyway. Really looked at him. Kong Jae-min, 36. Ruthless when he needed to be. Brilliant always. Feared across Asia and beyond. And she discovered over 7 months of working in his home, moving through his spaces like air, desperately, achingly alone. She'd watched him donate to children's hospitals under fake names. Seen him pay for his driver's daughter's entire wedding when the man was too proud to ask for help. Observed him visit his mother's grave every Sunday morning, no matter how exhausted he was from the week. This man wasn't just dangerous. He was human, and humans could be saved. Your wife, Amber began, keeping her voice steady despite the way her heart hammered. She's not meeting with lawyers tonight, Mr. Kong. She's not discussing charity paperwork. She paused, watching his face. She's setting a trap. And you walking through that study door right now is exactly what she's been planning for. The words hung in the cold November air between them like smoke signals. Jamin's expression didn't change. Years of practice keeping his face neutral, but Amber saw it anyway. The micro-shift in his breathing. The way his pupils dilated just slightly. The exact instant when disbelief crystallized into possibility, then hardened into certainty. His jaw tightened. Explain, he said, voice dropping even lower. Everything. Right now. So she did. And this is where the story really begins. Amber Robinson hadn't come to Seoul looking for trouble. She'd come looking for survival. 7 months ago, she'd arrived at Incheon Airport with a work visa, a nursing degree that meant nothing outside Atlanta, and exactly $340 in her account. The agency had promised her a position with a prominent family. Good pay. Private quarters. Respectability. What they didn't mention was that respectability required erasure. The Kong household ran on unspoken rules. Speak when spoken to. Never meet Mrs. Kang's eyes directly. Anticipate needs before they're voiced. And above all, be present but never noticed. Amber learned quickly. She mapped every routine, memorized every preference, understood that her continued employment depended on becoming background noise in expensive rooms. But invisibility taught her something the Kangs never intended. When people stop seeing you, they stop hiding. 3 days ago, that lesson became dangerous. She'd been folding linens in the upstairs hallway when the doorbell chimed. Sharp. Official. Not the casual ring of expected guests. 3 men entered. Mid-40s, well-dressed, moving with the kind of casual authority that comes from badges and jurisdiction. Tony Gardner introduced himself first, tall, silver-haired, smile that didn't reach his eyes. Then Edward Wallace, shorter, methodical, the one who assessed every corner of the room. Finally Jeremy Haynes, quiet, watching, the kind of man who memorized faces. Insurance verification. Tony explained to Mrs. Kong with practiced ease. Routine follow-up on your updated policy. We'll need to document the property, confirm certain valuables. Mrs. Kang's smile was perfect. Too perfect. Of course. Please, make yourselves comfortable. Amber continued folding linens, head down, hands steady. Invisible. They searched the house methodically, opening drawers, photographing rooms, asking questions that had nothing to do with insurance coverage. Then Edward found her in the kitchen. Miss, he said pleasantly, we'll need to check your bag as well. Standard protocol. Amber's stomach dropped, but her face stayed neutral. Of course. She retrieved her worn canvas bag from her locker, watched as Edward emptied it onto the counter with deliberate care. Wallet. Phone. A paperback novel. Chapstick. Her passport. He studied each item too long. Photographed her passport. Made notes. How long have you worked here? He asked. 7 months. And your schedule? Monday through Saturday. 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Do you have access to Mr. Kang's private study? Amber's pulse quickened. That question had nothing to do with insurance. Only to clean. On Thursdays. Tony appeared in the doorway, watching, measuring. And Mr. Kong, does he keep a regular schedule? There it was. The question that confirmed everything. I wouldn't know, sir. I keep to the household areas. The lie came smoothly. Necessarily. Tony smiled. Of course. Thank you for your cooperation. They left 30 minutes later, but the air in the house stayed heavy. That night, Amber lay awake in her small room, staring at the ceiling. They hadn't been verifying insurance. They'd been mapping the house, learning patterns, and they'd searched her bag not because they suspected her of anything, but because they needed to know if she would panic, if she would run, if she would talk. She'd done none of those things. which meant they'd measured her and decided she was manageable. Forgettable. Nothing. Amber Robinson had spent 7 months learning to be invisible. Now she needed to decide if staying invisible was survival or complicity. The next day, Amber cleaned the study while Mrs. Kong entertained guests in the adjoining sitting room. The door between the two rooms stood slightly ajar, unusual, but not suspicious. Amber worked quietly, dusting shelves, emptying the wastebasket, her movements automatic after 7 months of routine. Then she heard Mrs. Kang's voice, different from the practiced sweetness she used with her husband. This voice was sharp, controlled, strategic. "Tonight," Mrs. Kong said, "if he comes home early, which he won't, but if I need him detained, not harmed, we need him alive long enough to sign." Amber's hand froze on the bookshelf. A man's voice responded, "Tony Gardner." "And the charges?" "Fabricated but airtight. Money laundering through the Singapore accounts. The warrants look legitimate enough to hold him for 72 hours. That's all we need. And if he resists?" "Edward Wallace this time." Mrs. Kang's laugh was cold. "He won't. Not once he understands the alternative is public prosecution. His pride won't survive exposure. He'll sign everything over to avoid scandal." Silence. Then Jeremy Haynes spoke, quieter than the others. "What about the staff? The maid, she's always around." Amber's breath caught in her throat. "Amber." Mrs. Kang's dismissal was instant. "Complete. She's nothing. A work visa desperate from Atlanta who barely speaks unless spoken to. Even if she heard something, who would believe her over me? Over us?" Another pause. "And if she becomes a problem? Then immigration handles it. One phone call, and she's on a plane back to the States before she can finish a sentence. These people are replaceable." These people. Amber's hands trembled. The feather duster slipped, knocked against a crystal paperweight. The sound was small, barely audible, but in the sudden silence from the adjoining room, it was deafening. What was that? Tony's voice, sharp now. Amber grabbed the paperweight, steadied it, her heart hammering against her ribs. She moved quickly toward the far end of the study, away from the door, creating the illusion she'd been working there all along. Footsteps approached. Mrs. Kong appeared in the doorway, eyes scanning the room, landing on Amber. "How long have you been in here?" Amber kept her face carefully neutral, respectful, empty. "About 10 minutes, ma'am. Just finishing the dusting." Mrs. Kong studied her, measuring, calculating, then dismissed her with a wave. "Fine. You can finish the upstairs bedrooms now." "Yes, ma'am." Amber gathered her supplies, moved toward the door with steady steps. Not too fast, not too slow. She passed Mrs. Kong, past the 3 men watching from the sitting room, feeling their eyes track her movement. She climbed the stairs, turned the corner, and pressed her back against the wall, lungs burning, hands shaking. This wasn't about an affair. It wasn't about love gone wrong or jealousy or passion. This was about ownership, about stealing an empire using the law as a weapon. And Amber Robinson, invisible Amber, forgettable Amber, had just become the only person who knew the truth, which meant she had exactly 2 choices. Stay silent and become complicit, or speak and risk everything. In the garden, with mist curling around them like secrets, Amber told Jamin everything. No emotion, no embellishment. Just facts delivered in clipped sentences that landed like bullets. The insurance verification that wasn't. The bag search. The questions about his schedule. The conversation she'd overheard about detention, fabricated warrants, forced signatures. His wife's certainty. Her contempt. The 72-hour window they needed. They're planning it for tonight, Amber finished. The meeting in the study. That's the trap. Jamin stood perfectly still. Amber watched tension coil through his body like a living thing. Saw his jaw tighten. Saw his hand flex once, twice, as if remembering the weight of the gun beneath his jacket. Saw the exact moment rage threatened to override discipline. And then saw him choose restraint. It cost him. She could see that too. The deliberate slowness of his breathing. The way he closed his eyes for 3 seconds, then opened them with his face carefully blank. "If I go in there now," he said quietly, more to himself than to her, "I legitimize everything. They'll claim I'm violent, unstable. It becomes evidence." Yes. He looked at her then. Really looked. Assessing not just her words, but her steadiness. Her clarity under pressure. "Why tell me? You could have walked away. Left the country. Stayed invisible." "Because staying invisible means letting it happen," Amber said simply. "And I'm tired of being complicit in other people's choices." Something shifted in his expression. Not gratitude. Respect. Jamin pulled a phone from his inner pocket. Not his usual one. A burner, small and anonymous. He typed a single message, thumb moving with practiced efficiency. The response came in seconds. He read it, nodded once, then pocketed the phone. "The house has cameras," he said. "But they're not active unless I authorize them. As of now, they're recording everything. Audio, too." He paused. "You need to go back inside. Continue exactly as you were. Serve them. Be invisible again. And you. I stay here. Out of sight. They can't know I'm home until the moment I choose." Amber nodded, understanding the strategy immediately. Let them feel safe. Let them talk freely. Let them build the case against themselves. "One question," Jamin said as she turned to leave. "When they searched your bag, were you afraid?" "Terrified," Amber answered honestly. "But fear doesn't mean powerless." The corner of his mouth lifted. Almost a smile. "No, it doesn't." Amber walked back toward the house, her uniform crisp, her posture perfect. She entered through the servants' entrance, moved through the kitchen, climbed the back stairs. Behind her, Jamin melted into the shadows of the garden, becoming what he'd always been before wealth and power made him visible. A hunter. Inside the study, Mrs. Kong checked her watch and smiled. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. The mansion had become a stage. But she didn't know the audience had changed, or that every word she spoke was now evidence. Amber returned to the kitchen and prepared tea. Her hands didn't shake. Her movements followed the same rhythm they had for 7 months. Boil water. Arrange cups on the silver tray. Add the imported biscuits Mrs. Kong preferred for important guests. Invisible work. Forgettable work. She carried the tray to the study where Mrs. Kong sat with the 3 men, their jackets off now, comfortable, confident. Perfect timing," Mrs. Kong said without looking at Amber. "Leave it on the side table." Amber set down the tray, poured 4 cups with practiced precision. No one acknowledged her presence. "The documents are clean," Edward was saying, spreading papers across the desk. "Even his lawyers won't find the gaps until it's too late. By then, the transfers will be complete." Tony nodded. "And the timeline?" "He signs tonight or faces arrest tomorrow morning. Public charges. Media coverage. His pride won't survive it." Mrs. Kang's voice carried absolute certainty. "He'll sign to make it go away quietly." "What about his contacts? His organization?" Jeremy asked. Mrs. Kong waved dismissively. "They're loyal to power, not people. Once the legal empire is mine, they'll fall in line or disappear. Either way, they're irrelevant." Amber finished pouring, placed the teapot down gently, and left the room. They never stopped talking. Over the next 2 hours, she moved through the mansion like water, necessary, unremarkable, everywhere. Refreshing drinks, clearing plates, adjusting curtains, and hearing everything. In the sitting room, she heard Tony confirm the forged warrants were indistinguishable from authentic. In the hallway, Jeremy discussed which offshore accounts would be emptied first. In the study, Mrs. Kong laughed about how her husband's criminal reputation made fabricating charges almost too easy. "Who investigates a mafia boss?" she said. "Everyone already assumes he's guilty of something." Amber noticed other changes too. Mrs. Kong no longer asked the staff for anything, she commanded. Snapped fingers instead of using names. Treated the mansion not as a shared home, but as property she already owned. The other household staff felt it too. The cook kept her head down. The driver avoided the main house entirely. Everyone sensed the shift but understood none of it. Only Amber knew why the air felt suffocating. Somewhere outside, hidden in the garden's shadows, Jamin watched through windows. Patient, methodical, learning not just what they said but how they moved, how they positioned themselves, how they'd react when the trap sprung backward. Evidence accumulated like snow. Audio recordings captured every admission. Security cameras tracked every movement. Documents were photographed. Near midnight, Mrs. Kong dismissed Amber for the evening. "We'll be working late. Don't disturb us." "Yes, ma'am." Amber climbed the back stairs to her room, but didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed, listening to the house breathe. Waiting. Below, Mrs. Kong checked her watch again and smiled at the three men. "He'll be home in 3 hours." "Everything's ready." "Everything," Tony confirmed. Mrs. Kong stood, moving to the window, looking out at her soon-to-be empire. She didn't see her husband watching from the darkness beyond the glass. Didn't know that the house she thought she'd conquered had already turned against her. The trap was complete. They just didn't know who'd built it. At 1:47 a.m., the study door opened. Mrs. Kong stood behind the desk, composed, victorious. Tony and Edward flanked her like soldiers. Jeremy positioned himself near the door, the intimidation expert, the one meant to make quick decisions feel necessary. They'd timed it perfectly. Jamin's usual arrival. The hour when exhaustion makes men compliant. Except Jamin wasn't arriving. He was already here. The door behind them, the one leading from the hallway, swung open slowly, deliberately. Jamin walked in, not rushing, not furious, smiling. Mrs. Kang's face shifted. Confusion, then forced recovery. "Jamin, you're early. We were just waiting for me?" He closed the distance calmly, hands relaxed at his sides. "I know." Tony stepped forward, hand moving toward his jacket. "Mr. Kong, we need to discuss some serious allegations regarding money laundering through Singapore accounts." Jamin finished. "Fabricated warrants. Forced asset transfer. 72 hours to sign or face public prosecution." He tilted his head. "Did I miss anything?" The silence was absolute. Edward's hand froze on the folder of documents. Jeremy shifted toward the door, reaching for his radio. Amber stepped through the doorway behind them and closed it. The lock clicked. "What is this?" Mrs. Kang's voice cracked slightly. "What are you?" Jamin touched a panel on the wall. The screens embedded throughout the study flickered to life. Audio played first. Mrs. Kang's voice, crystal clear. "I need him detained, not harmed. We need him alive long enough to sign." Then video. The three men entering the house 3 days ago. The bag search. Tony asking questions about Jamin's schedule. More audio. Edward. "The documents are clean. Even his lawyers won't find the gaps until it's too late." Mrs. Kang's laugh. "His pride won't survive exposure. He'll sign everything over to avoid scandal." Tony discussing forged warrants. Jeremy confirming the timeline. Mrs. Kong calling her husband's organization irrelevant. Every conversation, every admission, every calculated word. The screens played them all in sequence. Tony grabbed for his radio. Static. Dead. He reached for his phone. No signal. "This house," Jamin said quietly, "has walls you forgot to measure." Edward moved toward the door. It didn't open. Jeremy's hand went to his weapon. "I wouldn't," Jamin said. Not a threat, a fact. The study door opened from the outside. 6 men entered. Not police. Not violence. Just containment. Professional. Silent. They positioned themselves around the room with the efficiency of people who'd done this 1,000 times. Mrs. Kang's face collapsed. The composure shattered like glass. "You can't, this isn't." Her voice climbed, desperate now. "Those recordings are illegal. You can't use them. In court? Maybe not." Jamin's smile never wavered. "But I'm not taking you to court. I'm taking you to everyone else." He gestured to the screens. Every media outlet in Seoul. Every business partner. Every contact who thought they knew which side had power. He paused. You wanted exposure. You'll get it. Tony lunged. He didn't make it 2 steps before Jamin's security contained him. Firm, controlled, no violence necessary. Mrs. Kong sank into the chair behind the desk. Her empire, all of it evaporating. Jamin looked at Amber, still standing by the door. She met his gaze.
Steady. Certain.
Call them, he said to his head of security. The Real police arrived 12 minutes later. The police arrived without sirens. 2 detectives. 4 uniformed officers. Professional. Efficient. They'd been briefed already. Jamin's attorneys had handled that while the study screens were still playing evidence. Detective Park entered first, eyes scanning the room, landing on Mrs. Kong. Mrs. Hannah Kong? She didn't answer, just stared at the wall where her own voice still echoed from the speakers. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, forgery of legal documents, and attempted coercion. Park's voice was flat. Procedural. You have the right to remain silent. Mrs. Kong finally looked at Jamin, not pleading, accusing. You could have just divorced me, she said, voice hollow. You didn't have to destroy me. Jamin met her gaze, without flinching. You chose destruction when you chose theft. The officers let her out in handcuffs. She didn't resist, didn't cry, just walked through the mansion she'd planned to own, past staff who watched from doorways, their faces carefully blank. Tony, Edward, and Jeremy were already in custody. Their radios, their fabricated badges, their forged warrants, all catalogued as evidence. Their credentials stripped. Their reputations dismantled. The media got the recordings by morning. By noon, every news outlet in Seoul ran the story. Not as speculation, as fact.
Audio clips.
Video footage. Documents proving the conspiracy. The headline wrote itself. Mafia boss's wife orchestrates failed legal coup. Jamin's phone rang constantly. Attorneys. Business partners. Contacts from 3 continents wanting to know what came next. He answered none of them. Instead, he sat alone in the study as dawn broke, watching the screens finally go dark. He'd expected to feel something. Rage. Satisfaction. The sharp clarity of revenge. He felt nothing. No, not nothing. Emptiness. The specific kind that comes from watching someone you once chose reveal they'd never chosen you at all. He could have made her disappear. Could have used the methods his reputation promised. Violence without witnesses. Justice without law. 5 years ago, he would have. But that version of himself had built an empire on fear. And fear, he learned, was temporary. Unsustainable. A foundation that cracked under its own weight. This evidence, exposure, legality, this lasted. Not because it was satisfying. Because it was irreversible. The door opened quietly. Amber stood in the doorway, still in her uniform, uncertain whether she was allowed this space now. The police want a statement from me, she said. Tomorrow morning. Jamin nodded. My attorney will go with you. You won't face any immigration issues. I'll make sure of it. Thank you. Silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, just heavy with everything that had shifted. You didn't have to choose this way, Amber said finally. The legal way. No, Jamin agreed. But the man I want to be does. He stood, suddenly exhausted. Bone-deep tired in a way violence had never made him. The old world, the one where his wife smiled at breakfast and planned his destruction by dinner, was gone. Something new had to replace it. He just didn't know what that looked like yet. 3 days after the arrests, Jamin asked Amber to meet him in the study.
Not ordered. Asked.
She arrived at noon, still wearing her uniform out of habit, though the household had shifted into something undefined. Half the staff had quit. The ones who remained moved through rooms like ghosts, unsure what this mansion was now. Jamin sat in the chair by the window, not behind the desk. Informal. Deliberate. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Amber hesitated, then sat. Silence settled between them.
Not awkward.
Waited. You could have left, Jamin said finally. The moment you overheard that conversation, you could have walked out, caught a flight back to Atlanta, disappeared. No one would have blamed you. I thought about it, Amber admitted. But you stayed. You warned me. You became complicit in dismantling my wife's plan. He leaned forward slightly. Why? Amber considered the question. Really considered it. Because leaving would have meant accepting that people like me don't matter. That we're disposable. Replaceable. She met his eyes. Your wife called me nothing. And for 7 months, I let people treat me like I was. But I'm not nothing. And neither is the truth. Jamin studied her. Not as an employee. As an equal. You risked everything. Your visa. Your safety. Your future. I risked what I had, Amber corrected. Which wasn't much. You risked more. You had an empire. A reputation. You could have handled this quietly, made people disappear. Instead, you chose evidence. Legality. The harder path. Because the man I want to be requires it. Exactly. Amber smiled slightly. So we both made choices about who we wanted to be when it mattered. Jamin nodded slowly, then stood, walked to the desk, and pulled out a folder. I'm restructuring, he said, handing it to her. The legitimate businesses, the real estate holdings, the investment firms, the import operations, they need oversight. Someone I can trust. Someone who sees what others miss. Amber opened the folder. Saw the contract. The title. The salary that made her breath catch. This isn't charity, Jamin continued. This isn't protection or gratitude. This is a job. Real responsibility. Real visibility. You'll have authority. People will see you. Listen to you. You won't be invisible anymore. Amber looked up at him. And if I say no? Then I help you build whatever life you want instead. Education. Credentials. Connections. Your choice. Always your choice. The weight of that word, choice, settled over her. For 7 months, she'd had none. Her life had been dictated by visa requirements, by employment terms, by the need to stay small and unnoticed. Now a man who could have demanded anything was offering her agency. I'll need time, Amber said. To think about it. Take what you need. She stood, folder in hand, and walked toward the door. Then paused. That night in the garden, she said. When I told you not to speak, you listened. Why? Jamin smiled. Actually smiled. Because the smartest thing I've ever done was recognize when someone else sees more clearly than I do. Respect. Not hierarchy. Partnership. Not power. Amber left the study with a folder pressed against her chest and a choice that would define everything that came next. For the first time in 7 months, she wasn't invisible. She was seen. 2 years later, the study looked different now. The heavy curtains were gone, replaced by sheer panels that let light flood the space. The dark wood panels had been painted white. The massive desk, the one Mrs. Kong had stood behind like a throne, was replaced with a simple glass table. Transparent. Open. Impossible to hide behind. Amber sat at that table now, reviewing acquisition reports for the Singapore properties. Her title, Director of Operations, was printed on the business cards stacked neatly in the drawer. Her office was down the hall, but she preferred working here sometimes. The space felt different when you weren't afraid of it. The door opened. Jamin entered with 2 cups of coffee, setting one beside her papers without asking. The board approved the community center project, he said, settling into the chair across from her. Construction starts next month. Amber smiled. Your mother would have loved that. She would have loved that you made it happen. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from trust built under pressure and sustained through choice. The mansion had changed. Fewer secrets. More windows. Staff treated like people, not furniture. Jamin's empire had changed too. The legitimate businesses thrived under transparency. The illegitimate ones, the ones that required violence and fear, had been systematically dismantled or transferred to people who wanted that life. He didn't. Not anymore. Do you ever think about that night? Amber asked, not looking up from her reports. In the garden? Jamin set down his coffee. Every day. What do you think about? How close I came to kicking that door in. How every instinct I had screamed to react. To dominate. To destroy. He paused. And how you stopped me with 2 words.
Don't speak.
Silence saved my life more than violence ever did, Jamin said quietly, because it gave me time to think instead of react. To choose the man I wanted to be instead of the one my reputation demanded. Amber finally looked up. And who did you want to be? Someone worthy of the risk you took. The words hung between them.
Not romantic.
Not dramatic. Just true. Outside, Seoul moved at its relentless pace. Inside, 2 people who'd saved each other sat in a study that no longer held secrets. Respect sustained. Trust earned. Power redefined not by dominance, but by restraint. Years from now, when people asked how Kang Jae-min transformed his empire, the official story would talk about legal restructuring, strategic pivots, market opportunities. But Jae-min would always know the real answer. It started the moment a woman the world trained him not to see touched his wrist in the darkness and whispered a warning that changed everything. 2 words. 2 lives. One choice that proved the quietest voices sometimes carry the most power. The study had no secrets now. Only light. Only truth. Only 2 people who understood that real strength isn't about who can kick down doors. It's about who knows when to listen instead. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do to people who think they have all the power is to pay attention when they think no one's watching. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is speak up when the world has taught you to stay silent. This is the story of Amber Robinson and Kang Jae-min, 2 people who learned that true power doesn't announce itself. It whispers, and it listens. Thank you for joining us on this journey, beautiful souls. Until next time, subscribe, share, and remember, never underestimate the quiet ones. They see everything.